Students, once you start the video, you will need a pen or pencil and a notebook to take notes and write down definitions. Feel free to pause or rewind at any time for clarity. Here are some definitions you're going to need to write down in your notebook. Erosion, the movement or transportation of sediment. Deposition, where sediment is moved to, or the placement of the sediment. Mass movement, any type of material that moves down slope. Windward slope, the side of a dune that the wind is coming to and touching. And slip face, very steep side of dune, untouched by wind. There are three types of erosion that we will be studying: waves at a shoreline, wind erosion, and glacial erosion. This is an example of waves at shoreline erosion. These represent the waves, this is the wind, and here's the sand and shoreline. The wind picks up and blows the waves and pushes the water into the shoreline. The force of the water breaks up the shells and the rocks that may be on the sea floor and breaks it up and pushes it on the shoreline. The water is eroding all of the rocks and shells, and when they end up on the shoreline as sand, that's deposition. So over here we have erosion, and over here we have deposition. Next, we'll talk about wind erosion. Wind erosion mostly happens when you have flat land with little to no vegetation. Vegetation protects the topsoil. When the wind picks up, sediments and topsoil get picked up into the air and blown away. This could be very harmful for some crops and farming. Some ways you can stop wind erosion is by planting trees on either side of your flat land, and it'll move, the wind will move stuff around, but you'll have windbreakers on each side. This also happens a lot in deserts, and when this happens, there is so much sand that when the sand gets picked up by the wind, it forms large dunes, and dunes are basically mountains of sand, and they move whichever the way the wind goes. The next type of erosion we are talking about is glacial erosion. Here we have some mountains and ice in the middle, and glaciers are moving masses of ice. They're huge sheets of ice. They are only where snow is on the ground all the time. Snow layers on top of snow, and they eventually freeze into these huge, very heavy sheets of ice. Gravity eventually pulls them down through the land, and they carve out landforms in between mountains. One of the best examples of deposition are sand dunes. They're a very good example because they take place in the desert where there's a lot of sand and sediment on the ground and not much vegetation, so wind is always eroding all of it everywhere. Sand dunes form like this. You have the wind blowing on one side. The windward slope is the side the wind is coming to and touching. It's often more smooth, and you could probably climb up that side. The slip face on the other side is very steep and doesn't usually get touched by wind. But then anytime the wind changes direction, the dune can change shape, or it can also move along the land too. It could also flatten out. Dunes are mountains, but they're also very versatile because they're made out of sediment and they're always being eroded. Once you have all of the notes and definitions written in your notebooks, you may want to study them for a few minutes tonight because tomorrow we will have a quick discussion and classroom activity over erosion and deposition.